Our theme this year, Food and Drink, Field to Table, has evolved to be one of our most exciting programs with greater depth than I think we ever imagined. We could fill days and days of programs, and you'll have to pardon the pun, but it all boils down to food, that essential without which we cannot exist. Every aspect of our lives is somehow affected by food. I began thinking about food and language, food and literature, and then of expressions in daily use, and they're virtually everywhere. If you think about it, food for thought, food for love, soul food, power drinks. Think of the apple in the Garden of Eden, to the big apple, to the apple of my eye, as patriotic as apple pie, and an apple a day keeps the doctor away. From apples to zabayon, A to Z, food enters into our psyche. Chocolate as aphrodisiac, chicken soup as penicillin, and what could be better than the spice of life? Google lists more than 100 expressions like, you take the cake, a full plate, or our glass is half full. The phrases are endless, but relate to virtually every aspect of our being. Food and drink and its inspiration is everywhere. We present before you a group of scholars who explore culinary ephemera in extraordinary ways to reveal the rich history of food and drink field to table. To quote George Bernard Shaw, there is no sincerer love than the love of food. So I'm not sure. I collect Valentines. I have a different direction, but anyway. A great influence in the creation of this conference was a book written by our first speaker. Culinary Ephemera, an Illustrated History, became a part of my own library from its publication in 2010 when I saw a comment in Barnes & Noble and I turned it over, and it was a recommendation by our president, Art Groten. I picked it up and it was immediately intrigued by the use of ephemera as illustration and the way the author wove it into a significant social history. When this conference was decided, I knew that the first person I wanted to have on our list would be this formidable gentleman. He is author of 16 award-winning books, is an internationally known food historian, and the director of the Keystone Center for the Study of Regional Foods and Food Tourism in Devon, Pennsylvania. It is an honor to have as our keynote speaker this morning, William Woys Weaver. Mr. Weaver.
Thank you very much for getting up so early to come and hear me. I'm delighted to see the enthusiasm of this crowd for culinary ephemera. You'll have to excuse, I'm having trouble talking. I fell down the staircase during the ice storm in the pitch black and lost 4 teeth. So I don't worry. I have to face the dentist later this month, and I think that's worse than falling. In any case, I'm going to talk a bit funny until this is all taken care of. In any event, I have been collecting ephemera because I've been looking at it. I'm a food ethnographer, okay? I took my doctorate in Ireland on that subject because it doesn't exist as a course of study in the US. It's about people, all right? We start with the humans and their behavior and then things, rather than starting with things and looking backwards towards people. So paper reflects, it's like a mirror reflecting human behavior, and I look at ephemera as telling stories about people. It's really a human story. And I realized in gathering together ephemera, I was just doing it on my own since when? The 60s? When it was cheap, that it hadn't been organized in any way, and going into libraries to use their collections. New York Public has it cataloged one way. It's cataloged in an entirely different way in another collection. So I thought, this is weird. We need to have a book about culinary ephemera because it's an area of collecting that's very important and it's huge. So I wrote the book, and it came out, and it's been very well received. I tried to bring order to what is ephemera. Let's start with the word. There are a lot of adults in America who don't even know how to pronounce it, and they don't know what it means. I had some children in my garden this past summer, and I showed them little seed packets from the 19th century. And I said, well, this is ephemera. They didn't know what I meant. And I thought, oh, here's a teachable moment, all right? I said, all right, look at the trees, the leaves. They're here today, and in the fall, they're gone. Here today, gone tomorrow. That's a very easy way to remember what is ephemera. But listen, if you take one of those leaves and you save it and you press it in a book, it's a memory. And a lot of the ephemera that we find today are memories that have been pressed into books because they were very special to somebody. They made scrapbooks. You went to a prom, you kept the program. That's why we have these things today. There's a human story behind every one of those pieces of paper. And that's what makes ephemera very important. In fact, I think in some ways more important than cookbooks, because cookbooks are kind of one shoe fits all. Ephemera is very personal, and it gets you closer to the people. Now, my collection is about, I guess, about 30,000 pieces or more. I haven't really counted it. And unfortunately, I turned 67 yesterday. I have to get rid of my culinary collection, so it's up for sale as far as I'm concerned. I'm concentrating on the Keystone Center because I have to narrow down what I'm doing in life. Let's go here. We're the only state, there's a reason behind this. It's an advertisement for what I'm doing, but there's a reason behind this. It's the only state in the U.S. with 5 food regions. And there they are. I'll tell you what you do. Whoops, backspace. Oops, here, there. We're having our first board meeting on the 22nd, so we're just very new and starting up, and we don't have our 501c3 yet. But what I would like you to do, if you have a chance, is go to williamwoysweaver.com, the temporary website, and see what we've done with ephemera to tell the food story of those different 5 regions. We've taken trade cards, menus, postcards, the whole 9 yards to tell the culinary story. So you'll see in a way how we can use culinary ephemera as sort of propaganda to market at least the Keystone State and its food ways. But this can be done anywhere in the United States. It's just a model. You'll have fun with this website because we have actually recipes up there. You can even find out how to make scrapple from muskrats. They're good. By the way, it tastes like swan. Okay, ephemera. We have sort of established the idea of what this slippery term might mean. Where are we going with this ephemera? What is it? How many categories? I tried in the beginning of my book, which is going to be available later today, to explain what it is and how it happened. I keep going backwards here. I must be dyslexic. There we go. This is one of the oldest pieces of ephemera that I've been able to find. It's not in my book, but I thought here's a New Year's greeting card. And what's interesting is if you start to analyze ephemera, you begin to see that there are all kinds of things taking place. This is a little piece of paper that was printed as a New Year's greeting, but whoever created this in Germany in the 1470s saw an image, probably on a piece of cloth from India, and took the Krishna, the young Krishna, and turned him into a baby Jesus. And here's your New Year's baby flying in, and the old one out kind of thing. And there's all sorts of stuff going on in here that the culinary historian in me is very interested in. That little box of candy, by the way, is a marzipan. Marzipan is a measure that was in the Middle Ages for measuring sweets, sugar candies. It got transferred to almond paste down the road. But let's go back. Marzipan is a measurement of volume, and it's an Armenian term. I'm doing a book on the medieval foods of Cyprus. And when that book comes out, oh yes, very esoteric. marzipan is all in there, okay? You'll get that story down the road. So anyway, I just want you to know that ephemera really starts with printing because we're looking at paper. Although I have at home a papyrus, early Arabic, what is it, 6th century AD. I'm told it's a shopping list. So I suppose that is also ephemera. It's a piece of papyrus and it's written out. So there we go. It was found in a bottle somewhere. Okay, what makes ephemera good? This is a piece in my collection. By the way, I have this up on eBay if anyone wants to buy it. It's one of a kind. I use this, it's not American. I realized, first of all, that culinary ephemera is very cultural specific. A lot of what's going on in ephemera relates to things that are unsaid, that you and I understand because we're Americans, or you and I understand because we're French. And so there's sometimes jokes or puns taking place in the images, and this has to do with our cultural background. I was going to do a history of the ephemera from all over the world, and I realized, oh my, wait a minute. China has been printing since when? There's a whole book by itself, and you have to understand Chinese or Japanese culture to understand what you're looking at when you see them. I thought, okay, I'm going to stick with America. I chose this piece because, A, to me, this defines what is a good piece of ephemera as opposed to, well, a commonplace piece of ephemera. You know, we have this connoisseurship thing going on when we collect. Well, first of all, we've got a picture of the person for whom it was made, James Ashley. We've got a date. It's 1731, no question about it. We've got interesting graphics, and the person who engraved this signed it. So it's like we've got everything covered here. We also have the name of this London punch house, and also the man makes a claim that it was Mr. Ashley who made punch famous. Whether or not that's true, that's another thing. We have to realize this tavern keeper has also presented himself in the mode of an English gentleman in his clothing and his sort of Napoleonic stance. So he's got, you might say, aspirations of getting above himself in the world. But also, from the food standpoint, excuse me, look at the top. There's something else interesting going. There are these hot pokers resting in the punch bowls. So what he is doing, he's serving his punch hot. He's stirring it up with these hot pokers. So they're drinking punch hot in this period. A comparable thing would be a hot whiskey sour, all right? Drink too much of that and you get gout. But in any case, this gives us, this whole piece of paper gives us an incredible story. This is the frontispiece for the social history of drinking in alehouses or whatever in the 18th century, and it kind of relates to what was going on in colonial America. So it's a nice kind of bridge across the pond. So trade cards are one area of collecting, and I have just 3 here. One I like because I think this was the French one. Not only does it give you the place, but it also tells you it's a restaurant. It gives you the price of the meal and what you would get at a restaurant. 1 soup, 3 main plates, whatever, on and on and on. A small bottle of wine or a bottle of beer, a dessert, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of restaurants didn't have menus. They wrote it in chalk on the wall. Little bistros in Paris still do it that way. So we don't have menus for a large portion of the restaurant story out there because things just didn't get printed. But this gives us an idea, at least, of what was going on in this particular restaurant and how it was managed. And this little card was probably passed out on the street by children advertising the place. It ended up in America because an American was in Paris at the time and brought it home. It's a whole other area of collecting. Americans Abroad, and I have a chapter on that in my book. Over here, we've got G. Byron Morse, Philadelphia. He was a very important restaurant owner, and he invented this loaf of bread that ends up as our hoagie loaf and our beefsteak sandwich loaf. He called it a pinafore, HMS Pinafore, okay? Submarine, okay, all right. You get the idea. Anyway, I love this card because it's the battle of the sexes. You talk about food, you've got the battle of the sexes. And Carl Walter, fish restaurant, we're going back to this local food, locavore. We even have a word for it now. Here is a restaurant in St. Joseph, Missouri, serving fish out of the Missouri River. So there's a whole story going on here that's interesting in the point that what goes around comes around, because here we are, right back again, wanting to eat food with regional roots, which is what my Keystone Center is about for Pennsylvania. Promotional trade cards, which promote events. You didn't print a trade card for this conference, did you? You could have done something like that. But anyway, it doesn't matter. The Centennial produced vast quantities of paper. And it's a whole collecting genre, if you will. But it's also very interesting from the standpoint of social history, because Americans went and they saw for the first time food products from abroad, because there were different countries representing their foods. And so in a way, it was Americans who had never been exposed to European cuisine got to see and taste. There was a French restaurant. There was a Viennese pastry shop. I mean, right down the line. So it left an impression on the American palate that we have to remember. The best collection of this material is at the Library Company of Philadelphia. One of their members went to the Centennial with great wash baskets and collected every single piece of free paper he could get his hands on. They have it, hands down. You can't beat that. And all the freebies, which was a brilliant idea, come to think of it. I do that now. But Postcards are a whole other category of collecting. And I like the postcards that tell stories. Here are the Heinz, this is the Heinz Pure Food. They're reacting to the Pure Foods Law of 1906. That's why these ladies are hygienically processing pickles. Of course, they're using sticks and their fingers to put the, to put the food into the jars. We won't belabor it, but it also shows you the kind of work situation in the pickling factories years ago. It wasn't all as romantic as it looks. Box labels are another area. This one is made in the state of Pennsylvania. I love these people from my Keystone Center, but you see these labels are very popular today because people like to frame them and hang them on the walls in their kitchens, as I suppose anyone who sells these knows that, because they're rather large. Crate labels were actually meant for the field workers. Originally, you know, you have a field of well, in this case, what do we have? Bartlett pears, an orchard of pears. Those pears are going to be sold and shipped to different parts of the country under different brand names, all the same pear. It's the same thing with peanut butter, if you've ever gone to a peanut butter factory. It all comes out of one tube, and it goes into like 10 different jars with different labels on them, and you think you're buying a different product. But anyway, this was produced so that the people the non-literate field hands would know where these pears should end up. You could tell them in Spanish or whatever. It's the cowboy riding the pig. Put them in there for that. Off it goes. So a lot of these labels you never saw them as a consumer. It was for the field workers and the people processing the food in between the field and the store. Okay. Who said vegetables aren't sexy? Now, you have to exercise like that every morning, ladies, and you'll have beautiful legs like that. Pinups are a whole area of collecting, and I had to look at pinups in order to date that, that particular lady, 41, 42, there she is on a calendar. So There are paper trails, I use that word in my book, paper trails that you can follow to help you date things, and that takes you off in very strange places. I don't know if any of you know about this, I don't know how to pronounce it, Sky or Sky Fay. It's a menu, anyway, for crop dusters. While we're in the field picking fruits and things, I thought, let's get a menu with crop dusters. These guys would land and go up to this little restaurant, and girls came out on roller skates, served them in lunch, and off they flew again. So it was a crop duster restaurant in the middle of an airfield, and it's kind of a rare thing. I've never seen anything like this before. This is the kind of ephemera I like, because it's kind of wacko, like me. This gets a little gruesome. African American stuff sells like crazy. There are a lot of people who only collect that sort of thing, and there's a lot connected with food. And a lot of it, you're going to see a couple of pieces that we didn't put in the book because my publisher thought it was a bit heavy-handed, but it's out there, and I said, look, it's part of our history, and you don't sweep it under the rug. We have to look at this stuff face on. So here's one. This is very, very mild, as you will see. But I just want to point out that this is a whole part of our social history. This is a menu from Chicago. It's meant to be a mask, so that it was for children. Yep, I know. This one, I'll tell you, one of the problems with this African-American stuff is that it's so popular, it's being counterfeited. And there's a lot of counterfeits on eBay. You can't see it, you can't smell it or feel it. And I can, by the smell of the ink and the feel of the paper, I can tell a fake from the real thing. So I've bought some fakes on purpose to put them side by side beside the real thing. Now the Mormon family that started this particular restaurant in Utah and then branched out, emailed me and begged me not to put it in my book. They said, we thought this was our family considered it a clown to attract children. And I thought, well, all right. The name doesn't really ring clownish to me, but this was a very, very popular place, and incidentally, if you find postcards of these restaurants, there is a monstrous, huge, big figurine out, well, I guess he was cement or something. It was the same figure outside. So it was a bit like that Amos, concrete Amishman in Lancaster in front of one of the diners to attract people. He was wearing red shirts, which they never do. Anyhow, this is an area that it's kind of touchy. I did an article in Gastronomica on this African-American culinary because it's difficult to deal with because our sensibilities have changed. This was supposed to be funny years ago. And it's very interesting to see how people of color are treated in other cultures. Here we've got a view of fishing people in Cuba. They're just normal human beings, not looking like clowns, just going through their daily life selling fish. So this is where the cultural attitudes kind of jump at you when you start putting all of these things together. War is another very, very important area of collecting for some people. Civil War is like out of sight. And I have some Philadelphia ephemeral, culinary ephemera from they called it the Sanitary Fair. The ladies of Philadelphia got together to raise money for these soldiers who were just dumped in the city, not given fares to get back to their homes. And they created, they had tents, they had, long story, but they also generated a lot of paper, which is an interesting area in itself to study. War has always been a turning point in culinary history. Things happen, new foods are coming, Spam, I mean, let's face it, and the Hawaiian love of Spam. These things happen during periods of time and stress and food shortages, and so there are big shifts in diet that happen. And so that's another reason why war menus are interesting to study. Also, what's on the menu and what isn't. I interviewed a family that had a restaurant in Allentown. It was on 22, and so the soldiers were going from Indiantown Gap to New York to get on boats, and this was sort of halfway. So at 2 a.m. in the morning, they would have 5 or 6 busloads of soldiers stopping at their restaurant. And I was trying to reconcile menus and food and well, he said, what we gave the soldiers wasn't on the menu anyway. I said, oh, like, there were meat shortages. He said, no, if you knew farmers and you had cash, you could serve the soldiers whatever they wanted, regardless of what was on the menu as restricted by rationing. So that's a whole interesting area of taking these war menus and then talking to people who lived through it and finding out how close does this hit to reality? What's going on during this period? So, as I say, it's the human story that makes this material interesting. And again, here we go. Labels for cans. This is Victory food. This is from Victory vegetables from down in Delaware, and these labels are rather interesting and hard to find today, but it's part of this war story, and you could do a whole exhibit on just war paper, if you will. Oh, and the government printed things on how to deal with food shortages, how to use substitutes for meat. I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on, and it spreads out. Canning labels are lots of fun to collect. People buy them, I think, to frame them, not realizing, of course, that UV really destroys these things, and you hang them up in your kitchen, and in about 10 years, they've lost their colors, and you really have to keep them dark and safe in order to have these beautiful graphics preserve themselves. I'm, of course, interested in this Salem, New Jersey one because it's part of our food region. Philadelphia stretches across. South Jersey is really kind of a satellite to the Philadelphia food story. So I was interested in that. But, you can't help but like this Butterfly brand labels. There are lots of them. But, there's something weird about these things. I've discovered that a lot of times, like the Butterfly brand, there's an awful lot of it floating around, and it's the same. Some dealers have got the same labels. There must be 100 of them. What's going on here is that these things, for some reason, weren't being used, and that's why they were saved. And the really rare ones are the ones you've only seen one of or something, because those were used to pieces, and well, they went to the trash with the can, probably. And there are people, by the way, who collect labels, and they want them attached to the can or the bottle. That's a whole other story. But anyhow, I bought a big collection of New Orleans ephemera from a man who now wants it all back because he lost everything in Katrina. You have to realize how vulnerable ephemera is. It's paper. Water destroys it. Silverfish love to eat it. I mean, on and on and on. In this case, when Katrina rolled through New Orleans, it hit some museum collections. They had things in their cellars that didn't survive. A lot of this paper was in private homes that are no longer extant. So Katrina, in one fell swoop, really put all the New Orleans culinary ephemera in a whole other category. It's rare. And it's going to get pricier and pricier as it goes. And this is quite sad because New Orleans is a food town. I mean, food tourism is what keeps it afloat, if you will. So this is, again, sort of like the African-American tragic ephemera. This is tragic in another way. But it also should remind us that we've really got to be diligent about keeping these things and putting them where posterity can look at them and use them, because we have a story, too. And that reminds me, just as an aside, the internet has taken over our lives. Where are the paper trails today? It's all electronic. What are people going to know about us in the future? I don't know. In any case, menus. We're going to hear lectures throughout the course of the day on some of these sub-themes that I've mentioned. Menus is one of them. It's a whole area of collecting. I look at them because one thing has popped up in my mind. People save menus basically because it's a special event. If you do enough field work and interviewing people, as I have done over 300 in Pennsylvania, people just didn't eat out very much before the 60s. particularly if you were in the farm, you lived on a farm. You just didn't. So if you went to a restaurant, you kept the menu as a very special memory of a special event. Here we go back to this memory thing. And one of the most common kinds of menus that I run into are Thanksgiving menus. And you know what the reason for that is? A lot of people who lived in cities didn't have large kitchens, so they couldn't entertain family. They would rent a room at a hotel and bring in all the cousins from the country or whatever and enjoy a Thanksgiving dinner they didn't have to cook themselves. So in other words, this meal, not only, it becomes a very special event, and we just see so many Thanksgiving menus and Christmas menus for the same reason, or New Year's menus, because people went out and partied for that one time. Or they met their boyfriend there or something, you know, there's a lot going on. Wedding menus are another interesting area. This one is from England, and it's interested me because it's also a Jewish menu, and it's kosher. Everything on this menu follows kosher rules of cooking. They did not skimp on the champagne. If you can read the labels, it's pretty good stuff. The interesting thing here was the custom that we're looking at, and this is what some Victorian women did, is that they bought a lot of extra lace. Their gown had lace, all right? Their veil had lace. They used the extra lace to put on the menu. So the menu sort of echoes the wedding dress, and it becomes a very special thing. It's also printed on silk. Talk about fragile. So here we've got this wonderful menu that actually we know what the bride's gown looked like because we've got some of the lace to go with it. There's your date. It's from London. It's not an American piece, but this was done in the U.S. as well. I was talking with someone earlier, nightclub menus abroad. You know, you brought these menus. Restaurants were aware that take-home menus were also advertising, like the matchbook. With smoking now being prohibited in restaurants everywhere, all over the country, what's going to happen to this matchbook? It doesn't pay to advertise on a matchbook when nobody can smoke there, all right? This is going to become like the drive-in theater. I have some menus from drive-in theaters. Food's nothing to brag about, but guess what? The drive-in theaters are gone. So we've got this menu that shows the movies and the kind of junk food you could buy all night long while you were watching it. It's a whole chapter of American cultural history right there on a piece of paper. So you see, that's where this ephemera thing is so important. You go to Mexico, you bring this thing back, you hang it up in your kitchen, your friends say, wow, that looks like a fun place. Then you say, go there. And these people are very much into that. Black Hawk is a nightclub in Chicago. I love their menus because they're very well done, the graphics of these things. Unfortunately, people will hang these up. You'll find old menus with thumbtack marks in them because they put them up on the wall as sort of an inexpensive graphic arts. It kind of ruins them to me. But one thing that we haven't done very much of is study the people who designed menus. We really don't even have a list anywhere of the people who did this. And I think all of you would like to know that, because if you've got a menu and it's an important artist, you'd like to know that person's story because it helps you give a time frame. And also, if you're going to sell it, how to evaluate the value of this thing. If you'll notice, a lot of these nightclub menus were lots of fun. The gentleman in the foreground here, who's dancing very closely to the lady who's almost underneath him in the red dress, see that? He's also patting the butt of the man who's walking off to your right. You see what's going on? You study these menus closely, and you'll see things that surprise you. Oh, okay, that's 1936. Well. As I said, the people who design materials are this untold story in ephemera. We need to know more about them. Just by accident, I picked up a whole pile of stuff from the estate of Eric Sloane. Now, we know Eric Sloane is the man who did books on Barnes and early American, and he was an illustrator. Well, guess what? He started as a menu designer. Now, we've got to find Eric Sloane menus. I think that this is going to be a whole category unto itself. I saw one, and it slipped away from me. He was very good with clouds. So that's the clue. Look for good clouds on a menu design. But anyway, here's his business card, and I think this may be one of a handful that survive. It's the onlyest that I know of. Anyhow, this just reminds you that there are very, very good graphic artists out there whose story needs to be recorded. There were people also who did job printing, and they're the ones who bought the card with the image on it and then printed local information for restaurants, businesses, or what have you. So there's a whole category here of just collecting job printer cards, like for Philadelphia or Boston. Boston turned out a lot of this, so that's a very good area. Chicago, Philly, Boston, what else? I think that's about it. But the job printers were all over the place. The actual trade card designers were usually in the larger cities. So you can find this African-American image of these children tickling the old man's nose with a string. You can find this image all over the place for different businesses because it was sort of a standard that was sold back in those days. Brochures are another area of collecting, and this is one of those examples of, I went to Europe, I wanted to eat in the very best places, and trust me, this Chapon Fin was one of the best restaurants in that day, and then bring it back home and show your friends how you lived while you were in Bordeaux drinking the best of the wines. The graphics are beautiful. The French, I've looked at enough paper, I can tell Italian and French and English and German apart. They have different styles, they had different artists, they use different cultural motifs. In fact, as I said in the book, American cherubs, you have these little putti that are holding up wine bottles and whatever. They're generally covered up, so you can't tell what sex they are. But French and Italian putti, you can tell right away. They're little boys. And so there are these cultural things, you see, that are giveaways, they're clues when you're looking at it. Anyhow, enter. Americans abroad. The interesting thing about this is they brought these things back to the States and put them in their scrapbooks, and now the Germans are buying these things. In this case, the Germans are very much interested in this material because they lost these buildings during the war. They lost all the paper ephemera that was in the buildings, in the restaurant collections, and now they're buying it back to put in their own culinary collection. So we've got a very interesting thing happening here. I think eBay has just simply made the ephemera market an international fest of, actually it's a shark feed if you want to know the truth, because eBay has run the price up on all of these things. It costs money to list, costs money when they're making money through, with PayPal, triple dipping. But anyway, it has run the price up of ephemera for better or for worse. But at least you can now go all over the world and see what people are selling in Belgium or what have you, and it makes buying ephemera a lot easier as long as you've got your plastic. This might categorize, Valentines is another area. I know that some of you love Valentines. The two doves are a very important Valentine motif. This happens to be a Valentine motif promoting a temperance dining room in Utica, New York. And I was interested in this because the temperance thing is it's an American story, and there's a whole area of collecting involved in that, and we'll get to it. What happens when we get Prohibition in 1919 is that there's a theme that starts to show up in the Prohibition ephemera, and it's patriotism. Well, if you've studied Prohibition, you'll know right away that one of the reasons it was sort of an anti-foreign thing, anti-Catholic, white Protestants don't drink liquor kind of thing. That was sort of the undertone for the whole reason for this thing. And so you see a lot of interesting things happening with Prohibition menus. This one from 1923 in Florida. Of course, it's Lincoln's birthday, but you find it all over the place on the menus. And I have another sort of a Philadelphia patriotic menu, because this man, Kossuth, came from, he was a revolutionary in Hungary and then came to the United States and was wined and dined. So this complimentary banquet menu is important because it shows you actually what they were doing with a la fourchette. In other words, this is a buffet banquet. You're walking around with a plate and a glass of wine. You're not sitting down at a table. And that's why there's all this food, because you're basically grazing. So that idea is not new. We did it in the 19th century for sure. I've been looking at Prohibition menus and things because they're very interesting. This probably had a blue room. We called that blue rooms in Philadelphia. That's where you knock on the door 3 times and ask for Joe. This is a wine list with no prices. Our wine list was. You see, there's a lot of kind of resistance to the prohibition that's going on here, and this is an interesting one from Atlantic City. What happens when prohibition is lifted? The corks fly and the clothes come off. And nightclubs become a real major area of entertaining. This is the French casino in New York. The lady is wearing feathers and nothing else. Across the board, we see all kinds of nudity, and also the menu, what do you call it, surf and turf menu, the dinner dance menu. It evolves in this period. It becomes kind of a standard American meal all the way down into the 60s until we get the Julia Child revolution, you know, and we go French. But the French casino really had beautiful graphics. It was owned by the mafia. It got closed down for drugs in what, 39, the feds went in. Well, the girls were doing more than dancing, let's just put it that way. Nightclub menus like the Stork Club are great, and actually this Stork Club menu is interesting because the people in it are real actors, and they're portraits of real people. And if you look closely, the lady in the fur coat is giving the finger to the lady down in the corner. There are all sorts of things happening that the artist has put sort of tensions between actors and actresses. Little scandals are all buried in this if you look closely. And again, you know, you have to, if you're going to look at nightclub menus, you have to realize in this period, African Americans did not get into the Stork Club. You had to go to the Cotton Club. You had to go, you know, into Harlem. And so there's this separation of what's going on with this nightclub story in this period. And I have the Cotton Club menu, and they're totally naked on it. I mean, they're following the same cues as the mainstream menus here. So it's a very interesting period to study in terms of social history. Railroad menus, that's another area of collecting, and I'm not interested in trains. I want to know what kind of food they were serving, and the Pennsylvania Railroad had very good food. If you read Philadelphia cookbooks, there's a Pennsylvania Railroad salad dressing that the ladies were using, the mainline ladies were using as a mixer to make other things and dips. And I have yet to find a label for this Pennsylvania Railroad salad dressing, but I know it existed because there it is, and you could get the salad on the train, and you could buy the bottles on the train in the dining car and take them home and use them. So there are all these very interesting stories, again, about railroad. And what did they do in the Pullman cars and the food that was served? That's a whole area. And we really perfected that, dining in trains in the 19th century. And boy, have we slipped. I mean, look at what Amtrak sells today. Menus, we'll hear more about them later. I prefer the menus that are, I think the most important ones are the turning point menus, the menus that really have changed American food culture. Howard Johnson's creates the road food thing, and a lot of businesses now operate on that model. Reuben's, his sandwich is still with us. We could just mention many menus. We'll hear more about that later. I don't want to belabor it. But from the terms of social history, these are the menus that tell us the big story. But then again, we also need books that that can help us understand these menus better. So if a restaurant had a book written about it, it should go with the menu because it's all part of that story. And the white turkey was quite popular in New York, and they had one out here in Connecticut as well. So there you go. And I understand this was a place that you went when for Easter dinner, and you dressed up your daughter in white clothes and blah blah. It was one of these very nice places to eat out with linen and all of that. So people have a lot of food memories about that. Die cut is one of my favorite areas of collecting, and these are bits and bobs that are shaped so that they have outlines. This is, in this case, it's a crown. To understand American dishes and how to cook them, you have to understand the Anglo-American Provision Company in Chicago. They're exporting American produce and selling it in England. The American lady who wrote that book in England was married to an Englishman who was the importer, all right? So the recipes tell you how to use canned corn and canned buffalo tongue and what to do with sweet potatoes and all of that sort of thing. So it's very interesting to see how this marketing business worked. The sad thing about this American dishes and how to cook them is that the iconic image on the cover is a can. It's as though American food comes out of cans. I guess for a lot of people it might. But in any case, this is not new. It's 19th century. There you go. More die cuts and all kinds of shapes. I think it's very hard to use a menu that's shaped like a lobster with all these things sticking out, but you were meant to take it home and keep it in an album. The butter crust is an interesting thing because it's also a whistle. It probably drove Mom mad with these kids blowing on it because it makes the sound of a crow. But they're fun. I mean, what else can I say? They're great advertising tools. Also, there are these die cuts that show images of families doing things. And they're wonderful because this is a Jewish family having a meal, but there's American family having turkey, African-American family chicken, whatever, on and on and on. They're a bit stereotyped, but these were given out by newspapers, and you can find quite a few of them in connection with newspapers at New Year's or at Christmas, something of that kind. Place names are another area of collecting. They're very beautiful. The New York Public Library has a huge collection of these blanks. They went on the little menu, they're called menu holders, but actually they were place name holders, and they went on the table to tell you where you sat. This is by Prang, Boston, good graphics. Promotional pamphlets, I know I'm closing in on my time. We're getting there. I think the first reference to BLT is in this die-cut Hellman's Mayonnaise cookbook, which went with the product. It mentions bacon and lettuce tomatoes sandwiches, 1929. Over here on this other side is another pamphlet. These are fun because they're promoting a product. And of course, you see if you buy these sunshine pimentos and you take a lady to dinner in a red dress, I mean, it's love at first sight. And if you don't get it, those peppers are shaped like hearts, you know. This is sort of your Valentine, finding each other over candlelight sort of theme. And the sex story starts in the 20s in American advertising. It's not there in the 19th century. I know, I got 5 minutes, and we're closing in on the end. Comic Valentines. It's very hard to find Valentines that talk about food, but the so-called comic Valentines or vinegar Valentines, you sent them anonymously. This is an Irish cook. You sent them 1874. You send them anonymously to people to annoy them or insult them. And then there's a whole other area that developed radios and TV shows with paper. You sent in your name. They sent you the recipes from the show. Here's Kate Smith, who never really cooked anything. There are ladies off camera who did the real cooking. She just lifts the lids. Almanacs and Calendars, another interrelated area. I won't belabor this, but it's a whole category that I talk about in my book. Labels. Things that we forget about. Singer Celery Beverage. This is Jewish American culture. You won't find this in Europe. You'll only find it here. And Philadelphia Zits. Zits used to be a popcorn movie theater snack. And somewhere in the 40s, Philadelphia teenagers turned this name into a skin condition. And, well, I got it, I guess, from eating it. But anyway, Cheez-Its are gone. But this word, it was very popular. That word still survives. Cheez-Its. There's a product that's just dropped the Z, okay? I like postcards and food. Yes, these are fun to collect. There's all kinds of maritime themes involved with, you go to Atlantic City, you eat seafood. I love these because they remind me of these B-rate Japanese movies, you know, the attack of the giant lobster, and they're lots of fun. You wonder what they were thinking when they designed these things. Postcards, again, become a very important part of food tourism. That's one of my interests. The menu on the side there is, all those images on that menu are postcards. It's a collage of postcards. So in order to understand that, you've got to look at postcards. Frailinger's saltwater taffy, there's the story of that. And then the Dutch Pantry, which was a big chain of restaurants on that model of Howard Johnson's. Again, here's Postcards Philadelphia. Advertising, I was able to date this because I found William is the maitre d' at this restaurant. Don't tell me how I know that, I just do. I found the menu that he's holding, okay, and it's 1938. So I know the date of this postcard, which shows people smoking Camel cigarettes in the restaurant. All these mainline people waiting for lung cancer, I guess. But in any case, it also gives you a sense of how elegant this restaurant was inside. Local story there. Old and more recent, I'm coming to the end of my talk here. I don't know what chapbooks are a whole area of collecting, and these are these little things. This one was sold by agents door to door with recipes inside. They're kind of a category unto themselves. There are labels that we need to collect today, like the Scrapple labels. They get stuck right onto the slab of Scrapple. So by the very act of doing that, they're coming in contact with animal fats, they're destroyed. The only way to collect those labels is to go to the butchers and get them in person. So there is a lot out there that we never see that's an important part of our food culture that we've got to go to the source. And of course, some of these guys didn't know really why I wanted their labels. They thought I was some kind of an inspector that was going to get them in trouble. So some guys gave them to me and some didn't. But I have a pretty good collection of Scrapple labels. I'm finishing up almost to the end. Two more slides. There are labels from today which do tell our story. This one, I have a friend who lives in Cyprus, but he's a Russian and he's from Siberia, and his buddies back in Siberia are sort of wheeler dealers. One of them is an ice cream man, and he invented this blue cell phone ice cream called Mobile, and it comes in this label. And I thought, this label is fabulous. This is kind of iconic because here is technology from today transferred into food. And I said, well, Ilya, ice cream in Siberia. He says, oh, ice cream sells really well during the winter. I said, what? Oh, it warms them up. He showed me pictures, long lines of people buying ice cream in the middle of the snow. Okay. Here is a menu for a 3-star restaurant in Paris. Michelin 3-star, vegetable cookery. This is what I'm talking about. There are pieces of paper today which are turning points. This man dropped meat from his menu. He cooks only food from his 2 farms and nothing else, and he kept his 3 stars, one of 19 in France. I was lucky to be able to, when I was working for Gourmet, to go and interview the guy, eat his food, and get the story. The reason his menu looks like wood, it's because the restaurant is lined on the entire inside with pear wood. And I'm done. Hang on. I hope that you enjoy the rest of the day as much as this lady is enjoying her champagne. This is from a 1934 menu, by the way. All right. Did you say they wanted questions? Oh, all right. I got 10 minutes. I'm a good boy. All right. Fire away. Yes, sir.
Would you like to reflect on, you've been mentioning a lot of things that necessarily are left out because of the medium or the period or the succession of media, digital taking over
Right.
or instead of the printed. Reflect on the issue of food ephemera and class.
Oh, well, yes. He mentions the thing of class. Well, I didn't go into it too much, but I do in the book, because there's very definitely a class cut to a lot of this. Well, the Grand Tour, for example, in the 19th century, this wasn't your average American traveling with a backpack. You've got people going to very expensive places. In fact, I think I've got a menu or something in that Americans Abroad chapter of a young lady from Boston who was sent to Paris with a chaperone, and her mother put her up in a certain hotel because it was like a fortress. She knew her daughter would not get out among Frenchmen if she stayed there. So, I mean, yes, this class thing is quite interesting. And you could even say, let's bring it down to the 60s. The menus from Pan Am. I've got the first flight from New York to Paris. It was 5 hours. Before that, it was 16. You had to change in Newfoundland and Ireland and and so suddenly the jet set age is born, and that was class for sure. They had a chef on board who cooked meals to order. Find an airline who does that today. Oh, there was the whole thing of riding around in dirigibles. You had to spend a lot of money to do that. So it wasn't just your average person flying in the Graf Zeppelin from Buenos Aires to New York. It was somebody who had a lot of cash. So yeah, we could go on. We could do a whole lecture on that subject. And I don't want to be. Did I finish my? It's a long answer for a short question. Yes, sir.
Can you confirm or deny that the internet was named after the acronym for your name?
You know, if I could get a penny for every www, I would be richer than Bill Gates. You know, my father actually was an inventor, and he invented the process for Scott tissue, the toilet paper, the double ply. And we've always said if we got a penny a wipe, we would be very rich. That's a gross topic, but anyway, it's true. Yes, any more questions?
This is just a comment about the BLT.
Yes.
We collect electric toasters, and your date of 1929, well, one reason for that was in 1928, Toastmaster came up with an industrial 3-slice toaster that they promoted to restaurants, saying, you can create this 3-decker sandwich, and not only can you use day-old bread, but you can charge 5 cents extra because toasted is this extra process. So,
Yeah.
and then Hilda Mayonnaise adds it in 1920.
You have to look at, in order to understand a lot of this ephemera, you've got to look at the technology that's going on. I mean, chicken and waffles were created in Pennsylvania. Yes, it's true. Go to the website, you'll see what I'm talking about. And in my most recent book, I have a chapter on this. But you have to understand, it's not just the chicken and waffle palaces, as I call them, but also in Erie, Pennsylvania, there was an iron foundry that made waffle irons. And they came out with a waffle iron for chicken and waffles in 1909 and advertised it in Ladies' Home Journal. So you see what happens? These are part of the paper trails that you've got to take your ephemera and run with it all the way through printed matter and everything. It's a whole book. It becomes a book. It's very obsessive as well. It's fun. All right. Done? Oh, one more?
One question. Could you just explain a bit more about the 1470s New Year's greeting card? I don't quite understand exactly what it is.
It was, it was a piece of paper that was sent to someone as a New Year's greeting, just the way we do today. It says Happy New Year on it.
In 1470?
Yes. Very. There is a lot of this early paper from that period that hasn't been studied very well.
Because you know the claim of the first Christmas card was in 1842.
Oh, I know about that story, but this is New Year's.
Because I've always said that's not correct. I'm very pleased to see this.
Well,
Claim that was earlier.
well, you see, I just subliminally said, okay, fine, because I know about this, this material from the 1400s. But as soon as we got the printing press in Germany, they're cranking out these little bits and bobs of paper. So, yeah. Yeah. Oh, I'm glad I was able to help you with your problem. Okay. Thank you.